We must start at the very beginning. The Warner Brothers cartoons, the great classic Warner Brothers cartoons of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and into the 60s. And studio was part of Warner Brothers since the 1940s. And Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, and of course, the great directors like Chuck Jones, Friz Freleng, Robert McKimson. And the studio was moving along and going along. By the late 1950s, short subjects were costing a lot more money to make. They weren't returning to the studio the kind of money the studio would want for such things. Television animation was encroaching, limited animation. The way they made cartoons in 1940 was completely different from 1956. Producers came and went. And around 1957, David DePatie was brought in to run and manage the Warner Brothers cartoon studio, I guess, as its producer, as its executive producer. DePatie was the son of a high-ranking Warner Brothers executive, and he was a film editor, and he was working on the lot, and they just basically handed it to him to maintain the studio. He became friendly with all the animators. He was, as far as I know it, basically a very quiet executive who did his job. And one of the things he did there was to help the studio get more into television, to do television commercials, to do industrial films, to manage what was coming up. The Bugs Bunny show on ABC, the half-hour weekly series that was produced by Warner Brothers, using the old cartoons, but also using brand new footage. And so DePatie had to run all of this. Somewhere around 1960, 61 or so, the higher brass called him in and basically said, we're going to be closing this cartoon department down because we just don't need, we have enough product. We have enough of this material. We don't need to do these anymore. The costs are not worth it. And so they basically said, though, what are you working on now? How long will it take to dismantle what we've got? How long will it take to stop everything? And he just had gotten The Incredible Mr. Limpet. They were still making theatrical cartoons, maybe the tail end of the Bugs Bunny show. And he said, well, it's going to take about, a year and a half, roughly, to really be over. Because, well, you got it, but it's over after you finish the things you're working on now. So, he had to go back and eventually had to tell people that we're going to be laying people off and it's going to be over. And he had a year and a half of which to think about what he was going to do and how to continue this.
Then they closed the studio. We all felt, a loss of something when Warner's closed because that was our future. We saw the end of the future, and Chuck went on his own before that. When he saw the end coming, he went on his own. When you spend 30 years in a company, and I see how some of these people feel today, the best part of their life is they spent with that company. And the rest of the years, what do you do with it? How do you start all over again? You're now at an age where you can't be hired. I couldn't learn to do sodas, squirt sodas or anything like that. What would I do? Be a clerk at a market?
What DePatie knew was they had just recently redone their studio on the lot. They were on the Warner Brothers lot. They had all this new equipment, all this space. They had the means to make animation, even though Warner Brothers had no interest in doing it. And he knew this is something he loved and he could continue to do it. So he thought about it and he kind of did some research on the market. There were still more commercials that could be done, industrial films. Who knows what else? Maybe television animation. He thought to himself, I just needed an animator to help me make this real. I can do this. I just need somebody to make this legit. And his best friend at the studio was Friz Freleng. And I know it was, because I know it wasn't Chuck Jones. And Robert McKimson was an able craftsman. He was one of the greatest animators the studio ever had, great designer, He'd always been the third-rank guy there.
It's harder to point to a distinctive McKempson comedy style the way you can point to a distinctive Chuck Jones comedy style or a distinctive Freeling comedy style, but he knew how to take the elements and he knew how to get the job done.
So if you're going to pick amongst those three, and Jones was sort of out of the question. Chuck had his own ideas and went off to his own successes. Freeling was just the guy. He was the senior director. Nobody knew more about making cartoons. And that said, when they closed the door at Warner Brothers, they didn't immediately start DePatie Freeling. They needed some time. DePatie needed some time to work out a deal, figure it out. David DePatie called him up and said, "Frizz, I've got something going. I want you to be my partner on it. Let's figure this out."
I went, joined DePatie. We each put in $3,000, and Jack Warner gave us a place just as we left it.
DePatie used his connections, and they found that they could actually lease the studio, this newly refurbished, well-stocked animation studio that Warner's was now abandoning on the lot, to him for like peanuts. It was some small figure, like $500 a month. I mean, it was some insanely small sweetheart deal that he can continue to have his company work out of the lot and pay the rent using this facility. And now he wanted to do it with Frizz Freeling. And they set up a business, DePatie Freeling, and opened their doors.
Right away, Dave became president. We divided the stock between us, formed a corporation.
Well, Frizz Freeling, when he started DePatie Freeling, basically hired his whole unit and more from Warner Brothers. All the people, Hawley Pratt.
I give Hawley Pratt kudos for taking Frizz Freeling's shorts out of just being ordinary to a higher level, because Hawley Pratt was Frizz Freeling's layout man, and he just made Frizz Freeling's cartoons just the best.
I think he was working at Disney, and then he lost his job and came over there. And I could see right away that, this guy was above the average. I would work rough and turn it over to Hawley, and he'd finish it up. If there was anything wrong, he'd correct it. Well, he added a lot to my work. I mean, he plussed it.
I have a lot of reminiscences. Hawley Pratt was a wonderful man, and he would come by, always sweet. Sometimes he flirted, sometimes he didn't, but he was always wonderful. You never were concerned about having to go to ask him any questions. You're always very helpful. And ink and paint department, when you sat in the ink and paint department, they were a little bit restrictive. They didn't want the girls to be associating with the directors or the animators. You had to sit in ink and paint and just concentrate on painting your scenes. So, but as an animation checker, I had to go and sometimes ask the director stuff, so-and-so did this. Is this what you really wanted, or you don't want that, or is this the right background? Whatever the question was. So that's how I got to meet Hawley and Jerry Shinneke.
He was Frizz Freeling's favorite guy to do all the dancing. Jerry Shinneke was really good at that. He could have, any time there was a dance scene or something, he'd give it to Jerry. Now, Jerry did the Pink Panther, the little subtle walk. If you watch the Panther, there's a lot of scenes they used it over and over. He's got this little walk with a little skip and hop in his walk, where a normal animator would just have him walking. But he added that little subtlety that made the Panther be cool. Art Davis, another dear friend. I was his assistant.
So Frizz Freeling, all of his great animators, layout people, all came with him over to DePatie Freeling. He also hired people like Robert McKimson, who was a director at Warner's.
Bob McKimson, he's the one that got me into the studio. Years ago, I worked at Dell Publishing Company and doing cartoons. And Chuck McKimson was in charge of us. And he comes in the room one day and he says, "Anyone bowl here?" And I said, "Well, I bowl." He goes, "My brother Bob needs a bowler on his team." Now, before that, I went to MGM, showed my cartoons. They say, "Don't call us," and we wouldn't even phone you. And I'd be depressed. So I couldn't get in the studios. So when I got on Bob McKimson's team, I was always doodling, and he says, "Oh, I like that cartoon. Why don't you come and work for me?" And then that's how I got in the studio, just by drawing a cartoon for Bob McKimson.
David DePatie, when he was an editor at Warner Brothers in the 1950s, before he was involved with the Warner Brothers cartoon unit, worked a lot with Owen Crump. Owen Crump was a documentary filmmaker and a short subjects filmmaker for Warner Brothers under contract, and DePatie was his editor. Owen Crump was also related to a guy named Blake Edwards. And Crump told Edwards, who was looking, he had an idea to do some animated titles for this movie he was making called The Pink Panther. And Crump said, "Well, why don't you talk to DePatie, because I hear he's running things at Warner Brothers Cartoons." By the time Blake Edwards got over to DePatie, he was running things on the Warner Brothers lot under a new studio called DePatie Freeling. And they said, "Oh, we'd like to do this thing. We'd like to actually have a character." Well, for his Freeling, we did Bugs Bunny. I mean, the best designers in the world. And they worked up, I think they say hundreds of designs. They probably worked up a lot of them, probably 50 or 60 designs of this Pink Panther character, which was a throwaway.
Hawley Pratt, they had other people try to design it, and he used Hawley Pratt's design on it as the Pink Panther.
That wasn't really part of the movie. The movie was about this diamond, and they referred to this thing called the Pink Panther. And they basically handed it to the studio to do these animated titles, incorporating, we're going to go in on a close-up of the diamond, and maybe we see the animated character, and then he could walk us through the titles. And basically that was the instruction. Well, Friz Freeling walked over to Henry Mancini, who he heard was doing the music. He was already contracted. And he said, "What do you got for the music?" And he goes, "Because I want to work to it, because that's what Freeling did best." And Mancini said, "I don't have the music yet," but he says, "Well, give me a beat. And he gave him a beat. He went back and he designed this whole title sequence onto this musical beat. And the Pink Panther was... The titles got sometimes better reviews than the movie.
The movie was good and the titles were good, so it was a win-win.
I was just a little kid, and my parents took me to see the Pink Panther film like everybody else. And when that opening segment came on, the animated title segment, it blew my mind. I don't even know how old I was at the time, but I was addicted to cartoons on TV, and I watched this thing, and there was this amazing animated character. My parents used to take me to live action films, and I didn't know what the heck was going on most of the time. Drive-ins and theaters. My entire life, I never forgot that shot of going in tight on the gem, the Pink Panther gem, and there suddenly coming into focus is this animated character. I loved it. But the Panther itself was just wonderful, and the elegant style that they animated him and drew him in. I didn't know about self-lining back then, drawing kind of a red line around the Pink Panther's body, but there was an elegance to the animation that was superb. It was wonderful. And I wasn't the only one, because look what a smash hit that thing became. Not only the movie, but the animated character.
The movie itself was a smash hit and got great reviews, but no one ignored those titles. The industry thought, this movie's a big, big hit, and it had these animated titles. Suddenly, DePatie Freeling was the #1 title house in Hollywood. And there are dozens of movies in the 1960s that the animation titles are done by DePatie Freeling.
We were getting offers from everybody, jobs from every producer to do titles. They gave us some of their titles to do. We were doing titles.
DePatie Freeling did I Dream of Jeannie's opening.
I Dream of Jeannie is still on.
They were the king of opening titles in the 1960s. And of course, they continued doing them for Blake Edwards. His next movie, which was a sequel to The Pink Panther, was A Shot in the Dark, which introduced the inspector character that would be all over those titles. Because they didn't think of it as a Pink Panther sequel. It was another movie, except it had the same character, Inspector Clouseau, bumped up, bigger role in this movie. And they did the titles to that, and these movies came out like in the same year or within a year of each other. And the United Artists, who had only stuck its small pinky toe in the idea of doing short subjects, suddenly got the great idea that these would make great cartoons for theaters. This is at a time when cartoons for theaters were shrinking or dying or ending. Suddenly they're going, we want this. Now, they did the first one. They did a first cartoon, pilot cartoon called The Pink Fink.
And I did the title, and it was an abstract background. There was no background. So then when they said, let's do a short, I used the same effect. This little background and tried to use the pink wherever I could. And so it created another style. Well, what made this title a success? I had to try to carry that on into the shorts. Once it was on that title, I was stuck with being pantomime, so that he didn't speak. I figured, well, he doesn't speak. Maybe that's part of it. So he's a pantomime. So I had to do gags that were without dialogue. The gags had to be different type of gags than we use in Bugs Bunny. It's sophisticated humor. It's not the same kind of humor. Not until I had the Pink Panther, and then won an Academy Award. And then the Patty Freeling got a lot of publicity because it was a new cartoon on and it was different. It stuck in people's mind. See, we got a lot of publicity as Pink Panther, with the Pink Panther, because it became a very popular character. And the music, during the 60s and 70s, it was the height of my career in animation, as far as publicity. Warner's never gave us personal publicity ever.
And they submitted it to the Academy Awards, and it won. It won the Oscar for Best Animated Short for that year. So United Artists, so how are we going to make money with shorts? Nobody else is doing it. We do have a killer thing here because we know theaters are going to book these shorts. Hell, we just won the Oscar. They're going to book these shorts. How are we going to make this deal with them? But instead of making a deal for give us 6 shorts this year or 12 shorts, we'll put out 1 a month, which might have been kind of like what you'd normally think they would do. They really thought this through. They called up David DePatie and said,
UA wants to give you a contract for 156 cartoon shorts. You think you can handle that kind of assignment? I took a deep breath and I said, well, let me get back to you.
I couldn't believe it. Why would they do that? That makes no sense. But the more I thought about it and the more I know about it, it does. They were very smart. They were thinking not just of the theatrical releases, which were super successful, but they were thinking ahead to television. How do we actually make money back on these shorts? The future, by the mid-'60s, they had seen what happened with Popeye, with Looney Tunes. By the way, they not only saw, United Artists was the studio, AAP, UAA. They were the studio that bought AAP and were distributing Popeye and the pre-1948 Warner Brothers cartoons to television. They knew what a gold mine these short cartoons were. And now somebody was handing them a Bugs Bunny that they owned themselves. They didn't own Bugs Bunny. They didn't own Popeye. Warner Brothers, King Features did, but they had the cartoons. And they were making a lot of money just distributing the cartoons. Now they can own the character.
When we went into business and the Pink Panther made a hit, here short subjects are back in the theater. United Artists said, well, we'll loan you $75,000. You open up a studio, and then you pay us back. So we opened up a studio in the Union Bank building. It was the Union Bank building then. The building on Ventura and Sullivan, brand new building. We got the whole 6th floor, and we worked there for about 4 years.
Pretty much the end Warner Brothers studio just became DePatie Freeling. The exceptions to that were the people in Chuck Jones' unit who ended up following Chuck over to MGM and other Chuck Jones productions beyond that. But pretty much the Warner Brothers chronology, if one is really following Warner Brothers and one wonders to themselves, what would Warner Brothers cartoons have been like if the studio didn't close in '62? You need to look no further than what the Patty Freeling made in the 1960s and into the 1970s. That was what Warner Brothers probably would have become, like it or not. They would have become very much what the Patty Freeling was.
I think it's important to remember that Frizz was probably the only major, certainly of the major like pantheon of Warner Brothers cartoon directors, he was the only one who really goes back to the silent era. So he grew up in this experience of animation, moving drawings without any kind of sound, or without any kind of sound that the animators, you know, the director could control. And I think that's an important thing, because as his career goes on and he moves into the talkie era, he really sort of appreciates music as only one who, you know, you can't really appreciate food until you're hungry, or wealth until you've gone through poverty. And so I think Frizz really appreciates music at like a deeper level, perhaps than some of his, you know, the other cartoon directors of his generation. And I think that music is such an intrinsic part of his expression that it naturally comes through when he builds, as he did probably more often than anybody else. He would choose to build a cartoon using a piece of music as the narrative. And we see this often from these sort of overt song and dance musicals of the 1930s, all those merry melodies, up through the 40s, when he uses classical music throughout pieces like Pigs in a Polka and Rhapsody in Rivets, where essentially, you know, the music is the narrative and the images accompany that. And Frizz himself often said that, you know, he would like to use familiar pieces of music. And the danger about programming a Frizz Freeling retrospective is how many times do you have to hear the Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, because he uses it over and over. The same way that the conductor in Rhapsody in Rivets uses the blueprint of a building as if it were a musical score, and that like become, you know, the whole cartoon is really a very nice piece of metaphoring. That score, that musical score, really is the blueprint from the cartoon. It really absolutely, as Frizz said, it tells you where the gags are, it tells you where the high points are, where the low points are, where the setup is, where the payoff is, where the suspense comes in, where the tension comes in, where the gag finally, you know, builds to a conclusion. And it is like the whole underlying force of those cartoons, particularly Rhapsody in Rivets and Pigs in a Polka, where, you know, you could just see, or Mouse Mazurka. It's basically what you could do that was funny with those characters moving to familiar classical themes. It's not surprising that he would find ways to continue that even into the 1960s.
The music and the combination made it. Without the music, it wouldn't have been. It's da-da, 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 da-da. It's Mancini music, and it gives you the tempo. He's got to work with the music.
It makes sense that he'd be the one to build a whole series of cartoons around a piece of main title music. You know, essentially what drives those cartoons isn't, you know, the Pink Panther, the idea of the chase, or the Panther himself, but that main title music, you know, how that works as it becomes a narrative unto itself.
And without that, it doesn't work anymore. Combination is, I think, the music, Hank Mancini's music, and the character together, but somehow it's stuck in people's minds.
I did not work with Henry Mancini. I never met the man. I admire him greatly because he's a great composer.
My relationship with Henry Mancini, it started on a professional basis. But when we discovered that Henry and I went to the same school together in Cleveland, Ohio, from Italian parents and the same background, we related in that way. And of course, he was fantastic with his melodies, his warm, beautiful melodies.
To this kind of international era where, you know, somebody like Mancini could become this super household name and become a brand name in a way that was totally different from musical auteurs who had been brand names before that. I mean, there's nothing, you know, Mancini has very little in common with like Rodgers and Hammerstein or, you know, Irving Berlin or Cole Porter or someone like that, people that mainly for one reason because he is a performer too and because, you know, people knew what he looked like. But it just screams his name all over it. You know, in 7 seconds it's a Mancini score.
Now, all the time John Dunn was there and he did storyboards, we should have animated all his storyboards. I mean, they were so funny. The twist he put on the little characters and stuff were great. And if you look at Shot in the Dark, it was from John Dunn's storyboard, and it was different than anything we did.
But he had a wonderful, his sense of timing on the storyboards, he was so funny. But he just kept this straight poker face, and you just weren't quite sure, you know, where you were going with him.
He drew funny, you know, that's not that common. Funny characters came out from his pencil that weren't like any other. And he had a wonderful sense of humor. There's varying degrees of that gift. But he kept me laughing all the time.
I've always loved the idea somehow that Yosemite Sam, is based, however loosely, on Frizz himself. I've only known and met Frizz on social occasions, so I don't know if he has a temper that anywhere near resembles Yosemite Sam's.
Yosemite Sam, that was strictly Frizz. That was the personification of Frizz.
I insisted and hung over guys' back and insisted they do it my way.
And every time I look up from the desk, here's Frizz looking over my shoulder. How's it going? How's it going? Well, gee, it hasn't even started yet.
He was hard on himself, hard on people. He wanted to be as perfect as he knew how to make it.
He knows what he wants when he sees it, I'll tell you that. Calling yourself an animator? He said that to somebody who was pretty well known over at HB one time.
Frizz wasn't anything wild or anything like that, but I don't really know. I think they thought, well, of course, Frizz wasn't a very tall man, and Nell's cartoon him is very small, you know.
Frizz is a little guy, and I'm a little person, and we looked at each other eye to eye, you know, but he's dynamite. He knows a gag.
Oh, the timing was great, yeah. A lot of it was Frizz. Frizz was great at that.
His timing was
right on the nose. The timing was exquisite.
Well, the way the actions take place, how can you explain timing?
I remember Yosemite Sam said to somebody, "Don't bother me, I'm thinking." And then a half a second later it comes, and my head hurts.
I tell you, timing, that was Frizz's point. He could time things that you just burst out laughing watching them. And that's a talent and is a characteristic. You could almost tell who timed what based on the timing. All I remember was a Pink Panther, and he's water skiing, and he turns to the camera and he gets this big smile because and he hits a pole, and that there was no, the pole was coming, nothing like that. It was like that, and it was the funniest thing, that expression on the face, and that was the animator, and the pole vibrating as he just think. But that was Frizz's timing, and I think it was almost, you could tell.
If you notice, all of our characters were little short guys.
Starting with Yosemite Sam, with this little guy with a growly kind of voice, and that was Frizz.
I didn't know who Frizz was when I first came out. I just knew he was the head of the department. We always had some birthday party or something we were celebrating, and Frizz would come down the hall, and he would get perturbed. We were always seemed to be celebrating something, but we did it on lunch hour or our 15-minute break. He was the Yosemite Sam curmudgeon at the time, so he would come in, "What? Another party? Another goddamn party?" But he would stay, and he loved it. I'm sorry if I'm swearing on this thing, but he would stay, and we loved having him in there. But as much as he protested, he enjoyed it.
He was a filmmaker, an animated filmmaker, and he loved it, and it was hands-on. I mean, he would come in and remember him looking at a scene once and said, "Who did that one?" They go to break his pencils.
It just seems like Frizz was such an inspirational character. It just seemed like he was the essence of what a cartoon character was in his real life, that all of his animators and artists inevitably wound up drawing him, caricaturing him in some way, and it was hard for those caricatures and those impressions of Frizz not to find their way into the films themselves.
I don't think he ever knew that.
Oh,
No, I really don't think so. I don't think he ever saw himself in any of them, but it was sort of an in-joke with the animators that they all looked at Frizz for inspiration.
It's never self-aggrandizement. It's always self-deprecation,
Frizz was a big celebrity in the cartoon world, but what's kind of funny is he was kind of an odd kind of celebrity because he actually encouraged unflattering portraits of himself. So it kind of was funny. It seemed like he went more in that direction as kind of a reverse egotism.
And you could always point to various characters in Freeling films, both at Warner Brothers and to Patty Freeling, that are spin-offs of Frizz's own flesh and blood persona. And that's always an interesting thing. It's like, Frizz is his own Nina, when you see him in these films,
There's a long line, like in Here Comes the Grump, there's the Grump, that's like Frizz Freeling.
It was a little guy who was sort of a takeoff from Frizz on a dragon, pointing his finger, saying, "Come on, Grant," and chasing after a prince and princess who were looking for something. And that was it. But most of it was him on this flying dragon pointing his finger.
To Patty Freeling, there's just a whole succession of short guy characters, the Inspector, Doodoo, and Hoot Kloot.
The problem with Hoot Kloot was that he was so short, his boots contained his whole leg. So we had this little little walk. He wouldn't walk like a normal person. He had no knees. It was just boots. So then when you get to a part where you had to put the Hoot Kloot on a horse, what do? You got a 2-foot short Hoot Kloot and a 6-foot horse.
I gotta get in that saddle fast, horse. Just as you say, Mr. Kloot.
Frizz would chew me out and say, what the, you know, like Frizz would say, suck a frickin', tuckin', frickin', sickin', frockin', buckin', stickin', knockin'.
Why those rack-a-frackin', rackle-nutty old skeleton?
Of course, Frizz caricatured himself way back in the Looney Tunes days, and in the DePatie Freeling days, the main one was the little short guy that appeared in the Pink Panther shorts.
The big nose guy in all the shows. We never came up with a name for him. Everybody says, what's his name? We said, the big nose guy. That's all it is.
I think Frizz liked little short guys because he was one.
What's your impression in general of the Pink Panther, and how would you say it's a different kind of character from other characters? Because I think that's fair to say.
In making Courage the Cowardly Dog, I was very much aware and influenced by the work of Frizz and his group at the studio producing the Pink Panther, because the Pink Panther didn't speak or spoke seldom.
The Pink Panther can literally do anything. As a character, it is the most flexible and interesting of all the Freeling inventions, especially much more interesting than the Little Man.
Well, I was amazed at my immediate attraction to the Pink Panther, and it boggles my mind that the Pink Panther was so successful as a pink character. And I say this only because the confusion over my own character, who was pink, and the reluctance to sell a pink dog to boys in this marketplace. But the Pink Panther continues today to sell, I'm sure not just to girls. So there was this quality. There was no pink character before.
We don't know for sure if the panther is male or female.
How could we not appreciate and admire his otherworldliness, the attitude of detachment, but engaged?
The Pink Panther is gender fluid, and this foretold what was coming way after the sexual revolution. People talked about gender bending stuff, and there was, you know, David Bowie, you know, is he girl, is he boy? But the thing is, the Pink Panther, you can't really say that it's definitely a man. And so he is actually pushing the rights of women, the power of women, by painting pink over blue. And it's clear. And this first cartoon sets it up beautifully. And I love it because of the clarity that women are going to win eventually. And we know that, right?
I thought Pink Fink was incredibly elegant, stylized in all the right ways, and it was funny. He starts out in that one not really seeming to have an agenda. Just, it is a little mischievous. he is trying to undo everything that the little man is doing. The little man wants to paint the world blue, or a house, and the Panther wants to paint it pink. And I mean, every joke is sort of based on that, ultimately. And I guess it's when the little man starts to resist him that he starts to get mischievous and turns into the trickster.
Lines are drawn between male and female, except it's not quite that simple. My favorite, and probably everybody's favorite, is where they're going up and down and painting around a column. I mean, there's never been a clearer symbol. The thing is who is going to win? And it's not the man, it's the woman. The woman wins. And I think that when women watch this scene, they're cheering because finally they have control. The shotgun scene, okay, where the shotgun is being used to paint pink, right? So basically that is the co-opting of the male position in the world, because the woman has complete control. I mean, actually, what's her name? Dr. Ruth would love this. I mean, we should call her.
There's a magical quality to the tools that the Pink Panther engaged in. And this is also part of the enchantment theory that I have for this character. And the gags perform their duty, not by the hand of the Pink Panther, right? But through an intermediary, whatever that was. I mean, if he put the can on a ladder, he walked away, but his adversary would then bump into the ladder, let's say, and the can would fall on him. So the Pink Panther, he didn't have to deliver the gag directly. Regarding the atmosphere of the Pink Panther cartoon, I could almost describe them as almost going backwards to theater. Again, almost your nickel seats in vaudeville. You don't spend a lot of money on props and extraordinary costumes and backdrops. You just deliver the goods.
And it followed the Schlemiel Schlemazel sort of formula. In case your viewers don't know, the Schlemiel is the one who spills the soup and the Schlemazel is the one who gets the soup spilled on him. So the Pink Panther was the Schlemiel. He was just trying to work on the construction site and do his thing, and no matter what he did, however well-intentioned it was, the little man was the Schlemazel that was always taking the brunt of it, whether they were red-hot rivets that the Panther was putting in the helmet because he didn't know where to put them. And of course, the little man puts it on his head. And everything that goes wrong ends up kiboshing or somehow destroying the little man. Schlemiel, Schlemazel.
My thesis works throughout all of the cartoons. There's no doubt that in the cartoon featuring the construction, that what you see is the male wish to dominate, to erect a world that he is in control of. And why shouldn't the woman be part of the building of that world? But no, he is in there and wants to kick her out of the construction site. It's like not fair, and it's ridiculous, don't you think? I do.
The little man is an astronomer in this one. That very, very long telescope, all he has to do is tilt it up a little bit. The Panther is just trying to sleep, as I recall, or just do his own thing and not be stared at. And one gag after another out of that. They must have had a lot of fun storyboarding that cartoon. And of course the surreal gag of the Panther painting the very, very end of the telescope black, and then when the little man looks at the other end a mile away, he gets a black eye.
Come on! In Twinkle Twinkle Little Pink, who's the star of the show, right? It's the telescope. And of course, the Pink Panther doesn't want this showing up in her bathroom while she's bathing. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. And again, women win. She erects a wall. She basically says, these are my boundaries. And isn't what everybody needs to say? What women need to say is like, no. You also feel the frustration of the little man, and you understand that he can't get anything that he wants, and he can't get left alone, and life doesn't make any sense. And that is what we're going to do when women take over the world, is basically we are going to treat all men like they're that little mustachioed piece of and we're going to dominate, okay?
Because, you know, the Pink Panther was enchanted. He was a magical cat, could do things, go through dimensions. That was a lot. That was a lot to take in as a kid. Here was a character with not the appropriate color, not disdainful of the establishment, not of order, but indifferent to it.
I mean, there's one, is it Psychedelic Pink? It's an interesting cartoon because it starts off very much referencing the 60s and I guess the early 70s, the whole hippie flower power, period of time. But I wonder how old the people were who made that film, because suddenly the little man is a beatnik in that one. He's not a hippie, he's a beatnik, which of course hails to the 50s. It reminded me of the Jungle Book. The vultures in the Jungle Book, who start out as a caricature or an ode to the Beatles, and then they sing Barbershop Quartet. So that made me laugh. But and it still worked that he looked like a beatnik, but he had the beatnik look to him. But that entire cartoon is it's like it was created on acid. The whole thing is psychedelic and out of focus and very, very, very even more so than usual, surreal gags. I mean, Panther cartoons have surreal gags in them all over the place, but this was a step beyond. The Pink Panther's tries to get into the orchestra. He gets thrown out on his pink butt, obviously, but then he keeps trying to get in and play the Pink Panther theme instead of Beethoven's Fifth. I love both of those compositions, but you can understand why the Panther wanted to play his own theme.
It's history. We're moving forwards. We want the Pink Panther theme. The patriarchy is coming to a close. Listen to me. This is my theme song. This is my world. We don't need to listen to Beethoven. Everybody's heard it. We know it. It's sort of boring at this point. It's like, this is my world, and you must accept it. And I think the orchestra basically would be happier because they wouldn't have to practice. I mean, all those notes, it's a waste.
The Pink Da Vinci cartoon, which is Panther back in his trickster mode, because all he's trying to do is foil everything that the little man is doing, who's Da Vinci in this one. Changing the mouth of the Mona Lisa, instead of this enigmatic sort of frown or semi, not even, I guess you wouldn't even call it a smile. The Panther keeps making a cute smile out of it.
Da Vinci wants to control this woman, okay? He wants to control her feelings. He wants her to be unhappy. And he wants to turn her smile upside down into a frown. Okay? And the Pink Panther says, no, we are not going to be unhappy. We will not let you control our emotions. Probably he's horrible in bed. Right? Okay. That's my position. He's not generous in bed.
I remember hearing that the little man's performance was being compared to Charlton Heston as Michelangelo in Agony and the Ecstasy, and Kirk Douglas as Van Gogh in The Lust for Life, which was an interesting comparison. And I heard a very funny story about that. Some years later, I heard that they were going to make a remake of Lust for Life. And the little man kept pestering his agents at William Morris to get him an audition for the role. And they finally got him an audition for the role. And he didn't get it. And the reason he didn't get it is because from most angles, you couldn't see his ears. The only way you could see his ears was from dead front and from right behind. So he couldn't cut his ear off. So he didn't get the role. I think the project fell apart completely anyway. So the little man, he thought of himself as a great actor. He was a solid second banana. You know, the studio didn't agree that he was a leading man. He wanted to play a leading man. He never was able to do that. But every good comedian needs a straight man. You know, Hardy needed Laurel. Costello needed Abbott. You know. Lewis needed Martin. Trump needed McConnell. You know, they all need their foil. But I think that was the little man's tragic flaw, that he saw himself as a great actor when really he was just a second banana. But he did know what his comic tools were. He had that great big nose, the way Streisand knows how to position her face for the camera to get it at its best, you know, most flattering angle. He knew the opposite. He knew to use how to turn his head so you could see that tremendous nose. And he got a lot of laughs. He wrung it for a lot of laughs. The Labanza, it took him far. He wasn't in every single short because of his ego, unfortunately. He, thinking of himself as a leading man, you know, he wanted leading man money. The Panther was really the star of those shorts. So you don't see him in a bunch of them because he was in contract squabbles with the studio all the time. And, you know, they were like, we don't need you. And they proved it to him. They made Panther shorts anyway without him. He was a little humbled.
The Panther could work with a piece of string. A Panther could work with a ping pong ball or a little no-see-um, you know? Can you just see that cute little muzzle? Right? Looking around for the no-see-um and, oh!
It's an interesting relationship that the little man had with Frizz, because I think he kind of saw himself as Frizz, which didn't make Frizz very happy, by the way, because Frizz had a bit of an ego too. I mean, most creative people do. But the little man got a little bit too big for his britches, perhaps. Yes, he did bear a passing resemblance to Frizz. There's no denying it. But he couldn't write, he couldn't animate, he couldn't direct, he couldn't draw. He couldn't do anything that Frizz did except look like Frizz. So that was kind of another one of his flaws, yeah.
Yeah, actually, not only could the Pink Panther work solo, but I think the Pink Panther had a long vaudeville career, working alone with just a fan, right? The fan. Who needs a little man, right? He's sitting in the front row. You just get out of here. I can do this by myself with the fan, right? This fan, yeah.
Well, he's still alive, actually, little man. You don't hear much from him anymore. I saw him not that long ago at an industry funeral. I forget who it was who had died. And it was kind of a sad funeral because not too many of his colleagues showed up, but he was there. The aunt and the aardvark were there. The aunt was drunk, as usual, of course. And Owl Jolson showed up and wanted to sing something at the poor fool who had died, whoever this funeral was for. And it was very, very strange hearing I love to sing about the moon and the June and the spring at a funeral service. A little strange. Little man seemed to enjoy it, but it was odd. Yeah.
We've been shooting this for a while, and some people have complained that, they've been getting phone calls, and are you on PinkedIn? That service, PinkedIn?
I actually am thinking about blocking it because I've been getting calls, heavy breathing. I have a pretty good idea. It's the little guy, right? Other people are getting those calls?
I'm trying to be a detective here, but yeah, I think there's something going on, that's for sure.
Okay, so they told me at the at customer support that I shouldn't speak to him or return any of the messages, but I get that deep breathing thing, and I want to pull him through the phone, through all those little holes, so he turns into a pile of spaghetti with little mustache hairs.
I just knew that Granny was very protective of Tweety Pie, and that Sylvester was about to pounce on him at any opportunity. And so Granny was a very sweet, nice, accommodating little lady, but she had an edge to her when it came to Sylvester, of course.
Well, I have the feeling that television critics on the whole are far too critical of commercials. Mrs. Edna St. Louis, Missouri, what do you think?
Oh, yes, I agree. Some of the most beautiful and tasteful things in the world are done in television commercials.
Absolutely.
Also, some of your best writing being done today is by your copywriters.
No doubt about that.
For example, there's that beautiful line that comes to mind. Don't broadcast bad breath. I mean, that really has a lovely ring to it.
Charming.
Don't you just love it?
I love it.
The girl breathes on the boy and he disappears.
My name is Taki Tina. You better be nice to me. I'm gonna kill you.
I know it seems really unlikely, but if you're out there, little guy, you know, give me a call. I do. I have an agent. I have a manager. He's a horrible manager, but you know, he said he can get you work. And I think you deserve to work in a production that you don't have to always be shaking off the smell of kitty litter. But I think in a way, little man, if you're out there, you deserve to be working in a form that is like Shakespeare in comparison to Petco. You're like working with Petco now. You need to work in a higher form of art. So give me a call and we'll try to get you a great job and get you out of this base low cartoon work. You deserve to be working in Shakespeare. No woman could watch a Pink Panther cartoon and not think, we won! Yay!